Welcome back to the class, everyone. We all know that crystals are what make the world go around in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. And right now, all of us civilized folk are saving each and every last one for the wonderful Jar Jar that is about to come into the game. However, we need to talk about what we should be doing with those crystals when the most important character in game is not about to drop. So that's really what this video is going to be about. We want to talk about the 5 best, most economical ways that you can use all of your crystals you get in game, whether you be doing it through completely free-to-play methods such as completing your dailies and climbing in Grand Arena, or if you are actually paying for them outright with cash. Both of these 5 things are going to be the best way you can spend those crystals in game, in no particular order, although there are going to be some favorings, especially for the crystal refreshes. So speaking of the 50 crystal refreshes, let's go ahead and talk about those first, purely because it's fairly simple, and anybody who's watched any of our in-game economy videos know that this is the real bread and butter of overall crystal usage and the best way to get the most bang for your buck, because over time, from a long-term comparison, you are going to yield the most amount of resources, whether it be character shards or Chikotech from the normal energy, Cantina giving you signal data or characters, Fleet giving you ships or relic salvage, or even mods from the mod battles. That is the best way to do it every single time. Granted, you only want to do the first 3, and the order in which you should prioritize them, that is really going to be roster dependent. A lot of the times Chikotech is going to dictate it, so normal energy really should be the first priority for most people. But whether you need to get caught up on mods or ships or signal data, that is going to very much be a person by person basis, because I realize most people don't have a crystal economy to be able to do all 4 of them at the same time. But if you have to put your crystals towards one thing, definitely put it towards those, just because long term that will yield the most resources rather than going and buying something through shipments. So now that we've kind of covered that, that is the chief, that is the rule, that is the best way to do things, and we'll go into a little more detail of where those numbers really come from when we get into some of other things here. But one of the things that we do need to talk about are the, what are they called? The Carbonite, yeah, the Carbonite circuit board. There is currently a pack out, and this pack, I believe, appears once a month, that has ridiculously good value. And this is going to apply for the next couple of things. Obviously, don't buy this if you don't need it, but there are a lot of people out there that are really low on this. I've actually been specifically stockpiling a lot of this right now, just because, you know, Jar Jar's coming out. It's going to require me to take 4 characters to R5 immediately, so I have to have a good stockpile list to be able to do that. But for those of you who are wanting a spreadsheet, do not fear, because we do have one to help us explain this. So if we take all of the numbers that they give us here on the right side of the board for the statistics for how much they drop, we can actually find the average amount that we will be getting per pack. Now, the pack does cost 500 crystals, and it should on average yield us about 160 overall pieces. Now, this is really relevant because it not only beats shipments, which quite frankly it should, because the shipments that we talked about earlier where you go into the store and buy them for pure crystals, those are typically really bad buys. But what's even really shocking to me is it beats the 50 crystal refreshes when you go to the most economical node, which is light side 1C or even 1E. It's kind of, they both kind of balance each other out. They can only yield 137 total after you do, you know, 50 crystal refreshes 10 times over to be able to equal the 500. If you're wondering where we got the drop rate information for that, I'm going to leave actually a link for the Discord in our description below, and if you go there, there's a cheat sheet that shows all the data that was compiled to be able to find those drop rates and how we got to this number right here. I didn't want to put that up here just because it would be a lot of numbers just to show one very simple conclusion. So the fact that this right here is giving you more on the pack than it is even for through the 50 crystal refreshes means that this pack is an absolute must buy if you actually need the materials, because there's no better way to spend them if they're even beating out what is currently the rule. So that is definitely why on our list over here, it is going to be making the top 5 things that you must be buying with crystals, again, assuming you actually have a need for them. Now, next up is going to be Chikotech. And I don't really love buying Chikotech with crystals, but the only reason that it is currently making this list is because CG has done quite a few things over the last year or two that have made Chikotech a much bigger bottleneck than it was before, and Chikotech has always been a pretty big bottleneck. But what I was referring to here is the fact that the MK1 currency, or Mark 1 currency, for our guild stuff here is giving us ridiculous amounts of gear that used to also share in the bottleneck. Like if we look at stun guns, which used to be a major problem, you can now just buy increments of 70 or 125 of them for fairly cheap. And this isn't dependent on the Endor raid or anything like that. This is accessible to the vast majority of players out there. And while that's super cool, what ends up happening a lot of times is when you're building up characters for either a team or trying to go after a new legendary like Starkiller, you find yourself just being completely bottlenecked across 4 or 5 characters, all wanting very specifically Chikotech. Now, you will notice up on the screen, I am specifically saying that we should be buying Chikotech computers, not shock prods, with crystals in the shipment store, because for the shock prod node overall, this is a very important piece for Bronzium wiring, which is another relic salvage piece that you are eventually, even if you don't need it now, you're eventually going to need a whole lot of. And when you go and do the computer node for normal energy for 50 crystal refreshes, you're not going to have that. So if we're trying to balance this out, if we're trying to find the most amount of value here, we want to be doing this node as much as possible with our 50 crystal refreshes. And then when we run out of 50 crystal refreshes and we still need Chikotech, even after we've exhausted GAC currency, get 2 and get 3, and you really should be doing that first. Exhaust those 3 currencies entirely to Chikotech, then we can finally come around to the battle computers that are going to be on the dark side node. So we talked a little bit about the Carbonite circuit board value, and I do want to show where the Chikotech overall value does sit as well. We kind of talked about this before, about how 50 crystal refreshes have the most amount of value. I didn't really show any proof for that, but this is very much so how your refreshes are going to stack up compared to shipments if you start looking at all their price differences. On average, Chikotech have about a 22% drop rate. You're going to yield about 26 after you spend 500 crystals worth of 50 crystal refreshes. Shipments, you're only going to get about 18, so it's not nearly as good. We should be exhausting that first. We should be exhausting GAC currency, get 2, get 3, and then what we really don't want to do is use the 100 crystal refreshes on them, because at that point we could just be getting a better deal through shipment. And again, the only reason why we're really recommending buying Chikotech this way is not because it's economical, it's because there's just a very high need for it. And even after a lot of players exhaust all the different ways they can get it, again, farming through the nodes, get 2, get 3 GAC, they still need more. So we have to kind of allow it as an exception, because what we don't want to do is just go 1 or 2 or 3 seasons of GAC without Starkiller, because we're refusing to buy Chikotech purely because of the value on it. So again, more of a last resort, but it's going to be quite common just given how much in need Chikotech really are. So now that we've talked about those 3 major things, we need to talk about a much more expensive purchase when it comes to crystals, but also a very necessary one, and that is going to be refreshing these stupid Journey Guide fleet masteries. And this is only going to apply to the Leviathan, Profundity, and Executor ones, not so much to the other fleets that come by a lot more often. But basically the reason why is because this specific mission to get more shards of your Profundity, Executor, and Leviathan, it only comes around once a month. And if you don't spend crystals to be able to get these shards, it will take you over 2 years to fully farm the ship. And while Profundity actually does have quite a bit of value at maybe 5 or 6 stars, Executor and Leviathan really need to be 7 stars to do every single thing that they want to do as far as the overall meta is concerned. And I realize that it's not a great system. I'm not trying to like back this and say this is how all things should be, but it is currently the reality. And by spending 1,000 crystal refreshes or 8,000 crystal refresh every single time this event comes around and cutting that time in half, or just throwing as much as you possibly can, is going to be very beneficial, because we just can't be waiting 2 years or 25 months to be able to get everything from it that we need to be able to max out the ship. We gotta have to do it before that. I mean, you can do it the long ways around. Yeah, I'm just worried about the different ways we're going to be costing ourselves resources in other areas of the game, whether it be overall PvP performance or the GCs, or even TB if you're using Profundity and things like that during those missions. So overall, really important for crystals. I'm not saying you have to have 25,000 crystals banked to be able to do this over time, but overall, we should be doing some here or there just to kind of get it over with. I realize it's not great, but it is what it is. Next up is going to be signal data, and signal data is very much in the same exact camp as Chikotech. It is overall not a good buy when buying it through shipments. Oh, by the way, when we were talking about Chikotech, this is where I was referring to buying them from with crystals in here. I guess I didn't make that very clear. But the same is going to be true for signal data. Signal data is not a really great buy. You are much better off using the 100 crystal refreshes through Cantina to be able to get the resources. That being said, signal data, just like Chikotech, you get 1,000 of it, you burn through 1,000 of it almost instantly. You always need more. Every single character wants it. It's very important to have. And ultimately, what you don't want to have is every other single resource needed to upgrade a character to Relic 5 to be able to use a Datacron or enter into a legendary event or whatever it is, and just be constantly held back by this. So while, again, not the most economical buy, it very so much falls into a similar category as the Chikotech sheet that we showed before, where the 100 crystal refreshes through Cantina is the best way to do it, then shipments, then 200s. But overall, it's just something that we ultimately end up having to do because it's such a large bottleneck for both mid and end game. And if you're in the very beginning of the game, be sparing with it, because once it's gone, it does not start coming back very quickly. And I will say this, in addition to talking about those specific shipments that we just looked at, there can be, and we've done a video on this, and it's hard to do, but if you can somehow trick the algorithm for the daily deals to only be selling those are typically, do your math, but those are typically much better buys overall than just going through and buying them in shipments. We've been able to do it once or twice. I have not been able to get it consistent, even when buying them when they come up, and there are a lot of factors that go into that, so I can't really promise results. But at the same time, if it does happen, definitely take advantage of it, even if you don't need the signal data right now, just because it's a better deal than you're going to get through shipments. And overall, you're going to have to use it at some point. So, like we kind of said at the very beginning of the video, obviously Jar Jar is going to take precedent, but if you're looking for other areas to spend your crystals, regardless of how you're getting them, these are the 5 ways that I do it pretty consistently, with the exception of Chikotech, because my account really isn't beginning or mid game anymore. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. We're looking forward to Jar Jar. Until the next time, stay awesome.